growing up in South Africa really helped give me an insight into, I guess, the hardware world, because this was back in the late 70s into the early 80s, when America was experiencing a period of peace under Reagan, but where all the wars were being fought offshore, and there were countless little battles between capitalists and communists all over South America and all over the Third World. So essentially I was probably had the advantage of growing up in a something like a post 9/11 environment, in that certainly I grew up somewhere where you couldn't trust the police force, where you knew the government and the TV were lying to you, and there was also this gut sensation that the entire society was about to crumble around you at any moment, all of which fed into the movie. I guess to some extent hardware simply ups the ante by making the first world behave a bit like the third world.
I do like the daddy, but the daddy wouldn't do. Remember that one time I ever did? You know like that guy, he was fine.
I started making Super 8 movies when I was about 14 or 15 at school. And hardware really grows out of one of the early Super 8 experiments. But weirdly, the Super 8 isn't a horror movie, it's a film about nostalgia for the future. It's a bunch of characters sitting around reminiscing about the good old days that are still to come.
I was afraid.
Incidents in Expanding Universe was probably a little bit more than a short. It was a ridiculously ambitious movie to make at probably about the age of 17, 18. It actually spanned quite a few years, because we originally just started filming quite spontaneously with a script that Richard had written.
One of the things I find most intriguing about the Super 8 movie is that so many of the people involved in it were either killed or traumatized within a sort of 2 or 3 years afterwards, because almost everyone was drafted into the Angolan Bush War just after the Super 8 movie shot. So there is at least a sense of impending doom hanging over the proceedings that I watched now. But it kind of gave us the ability to not so much get the movie made, but when I ended up basically running away from the South African military and the military police, which forced me to go to Namibia and then to England.
I was running at the time, in the late 80s, a production company of music videos with my then partners Nick Bell and Trix Worrell. The company was called Wicked. We had a very small roster of directors. And Richard was in that small group of directors. And I think lots of people, including us, had ambitions to go and make proper films. And in a way, the sort of dreaded thing happened to Richard at some point, who was making our music videos, and he was sort of the odd man out, and we were making the most interesting music videos with bands like Fields of the Nephilim and other kind of slightly more obscure groups. And said, well, I've written a script, and would you like to read it? And it's sort of, you dread that in a way, because what do you do if it's not very good?
And it wasn't the first screenplay or the first project we tried to come out to bat with either. To an extent, Hardware was the kind of the stupidest screenplay that we had on hand, because I'd written about 3 or 4 sci-fi scripts up to then. And this was the one where finally we decided, okay, what do they want? We're going to try and, we're going to put in the chainsaw, we're going to put in the baseball bat, we're going to put in the gas explosion, the cliffhanger sequence, we're going to have a shower scene, etc. It's got a sort of a checklist of all the juicy elements that could possibly be in there, and it's all in one location. So it was kind of the boiled down version of everything else that was going on.
But actually it turned out to be a fantastically great script. It was obviously in a genre, and in a genre that certainly at the time the British film industry wasn't delivering in any way, shape or form. And we set out in a really brilliantly naive way to go and make that film.
Of course, a career in music videos doesn't translate into a career in feature films. I mean, I figured at that point I was just never going to break into features, so we'd written any number of scripts and had been flinging ourselves at the door every which way. So somewhere in the beginning of 1989, I decided to drop out of the business pretty much entirely and went to Afghanistan, where I joined Hezbollah Lemmy, which is a fundamentalist guerrilla party under General Yunus Khalis, and got myself involved in the war. I was very keen on fighting the Russians before they'd had time to pull out, and went herring off to the Hindu Kush, basically, with cameraman and one other person.
Palace grew out of the Scala, and Scala was a cinema that I ran for 10 years. And the idea of the Scala cinema was to present to a very sort of eager audience at that time, a very widespread group of films, for everything from Werner Herzog to John Waters to Russ Meyer to Clint Eastwood, Lauren Hardy days, Prisoner days. It was a very varied fare, but generally quite subversive movies and quite difficult films to see. Films like Todd Browning's Freaks, you know, movies like Eraserhead, which we premiered at the Scala. It was an absolute cornucopia of different kinds of movies, but all of them had a sort of one strand, which was that they were fairly subversive. They were fairly different and strange, and not your average entertainment.
It was a fabulous cinema. The Scala ran all day, all-nighters on the weekends, so you could go in the morning and stay there until the next day, sleep in the front rows. And, I mean, I first got in there literally because I had to find a place to sleep. I saw all of the Dario Argento movies, for instance, for the first time, one after another in sequential order at the Scala. And it was a heck of a cinema. You could smoke in there and do whatever you liked, and eat food, bring your dogs. And Steve Woolley came up as the programmer and the projectionist at the Scala. And Joanne Seller, who produced Hardware, was originally the usherette.
I think we did a lot of really cutting-edge stuff. We used to do all-nighters, like on a Saturday night. We used to have, like, you know, all-night Grateful Dead fests or all-night LSD programs, or and we did, like, when there was that whole Video Nasties time in England, if you remember, where you know, they were trying to ban everything. We smuggled in a print of Driller Killer, and we had this like massive Evil Dead poster in the foyer at the time, and we had someone like die in our cinema from like a heart attack, and I remember the police coming down to investigate, and they were just like all over us because they saw this poster and they thought it was like the Video Nasties that had killed. I mean, it's like this crazy time.
Hardware grew out of that rather fetid milieu. To a large extent, Hardware is made for that cinema. The Scala had an overall kind of red-orange lighting scheme inside, and there were a lot of animals, cats and things wandering around, and when projected in there, it kind of fitted into the auditorium really nicely.
So that's how Palace began. It was born out of the Scala cinema and out of this kind of programming idea of trying to present all the different sides of cinema. What I wanted was essentially to nurture young directors and young talent, to see if there was an opportunity to make feature films with them.
While I was away, a copy of the Hardware script was floating around in London, and it was in the hands of a friend who was reading it with an eye towards the special effects work, who wanted to bust into the special effects business. He gave it to a producer friend of his who didn't like it, thought it was too gothic, who gave it to a friend of his, a guy called Trix Worrell, who wrote a comedy TV show called Desmond's, who allegedly was reading it out loud in the Groucho Club when it came to the attention of Steve Woolley, who worked at Palace. I think it was the bit where the voyeur gets killed. It was the line, blood and urine jet across the Venetian blinds. And Steve expressed an interest.
I was approached by Paul Trivitz at very late night in a bar, and he said he had this script and it would only cost them, I think he said, £200,000 to make.
And then he knew that I kind of wanted to do a film, and it was like a really, you know, it was obviously going to be a really low budget venture. And I read the script and like flipped out and was really like, I definitely want to do this, and kind of just sort of took off from there.
I liked it a lot. I thought it was really original, really unique. I thought it was quite impressive in terms of its ambition. I could see that it could be a great thrilling action movie as much as it was a science fiction film.
Paul Trivitz and some of the producers at Wicked Films immediately sold him the option, despite the fact they didn't own the damn thing. And then they had to set about trying to find me in order to get me to assign the rights to secure the chain of titles so they could make the deal stick, which then took them about 3 months to actually track me down, locate me and get me back. And a number of different scams and subterfuges had to be put in place to trick me into actually coming back to London. And eventually they got my signature on a bit of paper.
Meet me in the yard in 1 hour and bring the Mark 13 with you.
The what?
I met Richard Stanley through Palace Pictures, who I'd been working extensively with at the time. I'd just been working on campaigns for The Evil Dead and Nightmare on Elm Street. And Stephen came to me with a view to doing the storyboards. They didn't have much money, but it was going to be the first real Palace homegrown horror film. And we set up a meeting. I met Richard. We got on instantly because we shared a lot of similar ideas in terms of the films we liked, and he'd been quite impressed by the fact that I'd artworked the poster for Creepers, which was called Phenomena Elsewhere, one of his favourite posters at that time. And from then on, it was just a question of getting the green light for the cash.
At that time, Palace was riding very, very high. We had the Nightmare on Elm Street films, we had When Harry Met Sally, we had released films like Kiss of the Spider-Woman and Paris, Texas, and Wish You Were Here, and we were very, you know, we could afford to make a film at 200 or 300,000 pounds. So I then said to Paul Trivett, "Look, come back to me and with your budget." And sadly, the budget kept going up. Oh, we can't actually do 200, 300. Then it was 400. Then it was 500. And at that time at Palace, we had a very strong relationship with Miramax Films, who were about to release Scandal, the film I was producing, and had, with us, acquired My Left Foot and other films, and Harvey and Bob Weinstein were just beginning their company, Miramax, as a proper theatrical company, because they'd previously been in the television business. And I was beginning to lose patience with this ever-escalating budget, and also beginning to feel very insecure about where it would end. So I brought in an American writer to help Miramax get a handle on it, because I knew I had to get a financing partner.
And the whole film was funded out of, basically out of Miramax's coffers. It became an American movie. And in the initial script, it's set in a council estate in South London in the far future. There was no question that it was set in Europe, except when Miramax came on board with American money, all of a sudden the movie had to move across the ocean and develop American leads, which meant we came here to Los Angeles to try to actually cast the thing.
I think the real casting coup for the film was Stacey. I think the girl in the film is wonderful.
I pretty much fell in love with Stacey's cheeks and eyes. She has a very interesting looking face, and she'd only really done comedy work before. She'd been in like the Julie Brown Show and A Waitress and Earth Girls Are Easy, and I think she's in Dr. Hackenstein, which is just a terrible movie. But so there was very little that we could actually see of her work that would convince the guys at Miramax that she had the chops for the part.
I remember getting a call from Richard saying, "I'd like to offer you the part under one condition," and I was really excited but trying to stay calm because I didn't know what that condition would be, and he just said, "Will you dye your hair red?" And it was like, of course, you know.
That then led into a massive battle which lasted for, right up to the production started really, to be able to keep Stacey in the part. We dyed her hair and basically pushed very hard. In the course of doing that, I pretty much gambled away my ability to really decide on any of the other parts. And that by rooting for Stacey as hard as I did, it meant that I had to give away a lot of, I had to cede a lot of power to the others to cast the remainder of the movie.
30, jeez, Elvie, you're a generous man, but I think I'll hold on to it.
This is junk, and what are you gonna do with it?
It's Christmas Eve, Elvie. You should know that.
Yeah, Dylan basically just came over the horizon at the very last moment. And I should say that when Dylan arrived, he was nothing like the character written in the screenplay. Mo in the screenplay was a shiftless grifter who had lost his job with the army and who was just pretending to Jill that he was still employed, but in fact was unemployed, had lost his hand in an industrial accident, and also had cancer. He was also a junkie. He was mainlining all kinds of weird things to stop the pain of the cancer cells, but he was a complete loser as written in the script. And Dylan showed up and he was incredibly buff, worked out every day, muscular, really fit-looking, crew cut. Just no way could we pass him off as a junkie or as the all-round kind of likable but ultimately conniving scumbag that Mo was in the initial script.
The earth will shake, rattle, and roll. The masses will go hungry, their bellies bloat. These are the birth pains. No flesh shall be spared.
He was really into the Bible at that point in time. He was reading the Bible a lot. And strangely enough, it was Dylan who picked up on the Mark 13 quote. The droid in the movie was simply called the Mark 13 because it's an unlucky number. You assume they must have had another 12 attempts before they've hit number 13. But it was pretty silly. There was no ulterior motive to it. It was Dylan who managed to, somewhere sitting home alone in his hotel room, who realized that in the book of Mark, chapter 13, of course, was the spot-on quote, "No flesh shall be spared save that of the elect," which pretty much became the, should have been the film's ad line.
This is Angry Bob, the man with the industrial dick, coming at you loud and clear on WAR Radio.
Because I'd already done some Iggy Pop videos, or actually one Iggy Pop video that Sam Raimi directed. Again, there was this sort of palace connection with Sam Raimi from distributing Evil Dead. And so when we were looking for the voiceover, Richard thought it would be a fantastic idea to have Iggy Pop, and sort of approached him through that.
Nowadays, you need a gun all the time. Fucking bunch of shit what these people are doing to the fucking world. And this geezer come up to me in a boozer and offered me money, to sit in a cab and read this rubbish off a piece of paper, so I did it, Where are you guys going?
Downtown.
They dropped their gun in the Thames, which probably dissolved it at the time, it was so toxic. They had to go after it with grapples and shit. It was most embarrassing. I was really sorry about that.
Then I met Richard, and there was a lot of things that clicked instantly. Like Richard very specifically, he had, he would just point to films that he liked, or he'd point me towards certain references, and I'd go and look at them. I can't remember where this sort of small brown dark look came from. I think that was something that I developed out of Richard's description of his notion of what the planet would look like after this nuclear disaster or whatever it was that he was imagining was going to happen. Post-apocalyptic look. We did do some tests, and we sort of settled on this brown, smoggy, a bit like modern day China, I suppose. we were like 20 years ahead of our time in terms of the pollution look.
Richard gave me a massive list of films to watch, and I liked the horror genre, but I wasn't at all savvy with it. Really, I came from much more of a sort of art house film background, if you know what I mean. I hadn't gone to art school, and and I knew the classics, but he introduced me to Dario Argento, for example, and movies like Wolfen, and a lot of really Soylent Green, and a lot of really interesting dystopian science fiction films, and we milked some of that and put that into hardware.
And I guess coming out of the kind of Italian horror movies I've been watching, the main decision was to do it like a Dario Argento movie, to do it like or Mario Bava. The interior lighting in the set's very heavily influenced by Bava and Argento. And most of the setups in that film are actually influenced by old-fashioned 70s European slasher movies, which we've simply translated into a sci-fi medium. It's like, okay, rather than having a killer stalking around the flat, we're going to have a droid.
We knew that it was going to be a half robot, and so I guess the challenge was to make something which would still look visually interesting as a half robot. But we knew that the basic head was going to be a skull of sorts, and we knew that the arms would be sort of claw-like.
Even the end of the world has to start someplace, and the droid in hardware started with a nightmare or a dream when I was about 13. I mean, I was having a lot of dreams at that point in time, mostly about the walking guy, or whatever his name is, the guy in the black hat and coat who's always somewhere between towns, always with a storm somewhere not far behind him, and always with those Durango originals. And somewhere in the middle of all those dreams, I had one where he was wandering around in the wasteland and he was looking for something. He knew it was there. He was very determined. He was sort of doing this sort of sweep search, and then he started digging, and as he dug, he unearthed this metal skull with camera lens eyes and the hypodermic needle teeth, which was obviously the emergence of the Mark 13 cyborg. I didn't know what it was when I was dreaming it.
There was the idea that amongst all the armoury there would be some syringes which would inject a lethal drug. I think that it was Richard's idea that it would be an excuse to actually have some hallucinogenic sequences within the film, and so the idea that the injection could be a lethal injection, or it would just allow the person to die slowly, probably just by going mad with sort of crazy hallucinations. But also, the idea was with the syringes that they had this kind of fang-like quality as well, which just accentuated the idea of the skull and this kind of monstrous kind of apparition.
He pretty much arrived as a fait accompli. It's hard to tell from a distance. This is presumably the earliest existing surviving droid sketch on a bit of A4 paper from about 25 years ago that somehow has survived in the bottom of a box. But in the initial sketches, the droid's got night and day on his face. For some reason, I think it's because of the scene where he comes in through the window blind when Lincoln the voyeur opens the window and the droid's out there to get him. I want him to be like a kind of apocalyptic angel. There's a running thing where he looks a bit like Kali or the Destroyer God throughout the movie. We see the Tibetan tanker, and when he's on top of the console, he also develops a sort of... He looks a bit like a pagan idol. So the idea of him embodying both night and day of sort of life and death was sort of right there. But when we started airbrushing it, basically the lines from the rising sun side of the face met the stars from the night side of his face, and it just jumped out and became the Stars and Stripes. We took one step back from the paint job, and it was quite obvious it was the American flag, but we didn't actually put it in there for a logical reason. It evolved out of it. Otherwise, the impetus really with the droid was that we wanted a droid that would not be humanoid. At that point in time, the major amok droid movies that were out there were Terminator and Westworld, the original Terminator. So we were used to the fact that droids looked like either Yul Brynner or Arnold Schwarzenegger. And we wanted a droid that was all droid. There was a horrible mass of pistons and servo motors. And it's that little whirring servo motor sound that particularly chills me. Droid's neck. It was kind of like a Terry's Anglepoise lamp, which is something that draftsmen use. My mother was a professional illustrator, and I guess she was drawing for a living when I was a kid. So my earliest memories of being a baby in the cot were looking up at the shadow of her draftsman's lamp on the ceiling of the room. It's that funny Cobras-type, scorpion-type neck, which I guess stuck in my head. Then, of course, the camera lens eyes. And of course, the one thing everyone remembers about the Mark 13, of course, is it has a power drill for a dick, which it's really just something we did in the movie. It wasn't. It's very prominent in all these designs, but that's because we were very aware of the accusations of misogyny made against the film, and I didn't want people thinking that there was anything like unconscious misogyny or any kind of unconscious sexual message going on. I wanted to make certain it was overt. The power drill penis was pretty overt. The entire crew, in fact, refused to shoot that scene and walked. They were all laid down tools. The entire power drill rape scene, or attempted rape scene in the movie, is shot with just me, Stacey Travis, and Steve Chivers for handheld camera because no one wanted to work with that.
Somebody on the crew was offended when I was fighting the robot in my kitchen. The sort of long phallic drill was coming off of the robot, and they felt like that was kind of insinuating like that he was going to rape me with that drill or whatever. And I come from a real feminist background, and to me it was like, yeah, but I'm gonna whack that thing off later. So my mother had passed away a few months before, and maybe it was about 10 months before, but I kind of had a well of rage that I could tap into that, in a strange personal way, beating the crap out of that android and expressing my rage at the injustice of the world or whatever was very cathartic. at the end, you know, that thing had tormented me for many hours and many, many weeks, and they gave me the bat and, you know, action. And the first hit, I broke the bat. And Richard got a kick out of that and thought it was funny, but then I don't think we had another bat. So I ended up I think they found one more bat, or we just used the broken bat, and you can see in the film it kind of splinters off and breaks. It's because I kept breaking it, and that was one of the moments where you go, this is not a big budget movie. There's not 15 bats lined up, there's 2.
We made it like, I think it was just under £1 million, so about $1.5 million in that kind of area. But it was, I don't know, the great thing about it was it was never about the money, even though it was like a really, really difficult movie to pull off on the budget we had. But we really just, everybody who worked on it everybody had the same sort of sensibility. Most people hadn't made movies before. They'd come out of music videos or something, or short films.
You know, she had a crack team that could design and light and make the movie in a way that it would look like a real film and not like some knockoff. And Hardware needed someone like Jo. It was her first film. It was her first credit as a producer, and I absolutely needed someone that could hold on to the reins, because I could feel the thing could just escalate into madness if it wasn't being controlled. And so it was this great sort of sense of raw energy, and we worked like incredibly long hours, and we had like a second unit. As soon as the main unit finished, we had the second unit starting, and they would shoot all through the night until the main unit were back, and then they'd shoot. So it was kind of like this 24-hour thing to get it done.
I don't know how, I don't know, like between Joanna, Richard, everyone got it. I mean, everyone seemed to be on the same page. They seemed to understand the movie we were making.
But we had this fantastic like special effects team, you know, which was Bob Keene's company. And then we had this guy called Paul Carlin, who was the sort of creator of it, and Chris Cunningham, and Little John, and Steve Norrington, all these guys who were just like had amazing ideas, and I'd like come in the morning and they'd be painting like murals everywhere, and just like huge amount of creativity. And so of course there was like financial problems in terms of trying to pull off a movie like that, but they always came up with like really creative solutions to get around it.
If you have lots of money and no time, you can get quality, but if you have lots of prep time and not much money, you can also get quality. So we just set out endlessly, going back to all the techniques prior to CGI and whatever there was, to think of ways how you can do special effects and what we could afford and how could we maximize it. So it became also a logistical challenge in every single thing that we did.
And Hardware we made in the Roundhouse Studios in Camden. It's an old railway shed that was, I think it was Victorian, I believe, and maybe even earlier, but it's a strange building that became an art centre. The Doors played there in the 60s, and then it was disused for years, and we took it over and used it as a film studio. It was not soundproof, so occasionally you hear the trains going past from the railway line, and we had to put black plastic on the roof to stop the light coming in and the rain. But it was a great space for us to work.
I mean, it was the most fantastic place to shoot a movie because you just kind of had everything there, and we set up trailers in the sort of parking lot for offices.
And it was actually quite a lot of space to build all the sets we need to build and have production offices. We could build the robots there. We built all the gizmos. We went out and bought loads and loads of scrap materials. Obviously that fits the story because Jill she makes sculptures out of scrap. So we thought that's exactly what we should do. So we went and got circuit boards, pieces of old computer, and just had fun with it, really.
What was great about the set and the way that they art directed it and everything was it really felt everything was kind of beat up, and it really felt like when I punched those computers and the graphics came up, when I was watching TV and smoking the joint, they had the video up there, and it was freaky video, and they had the weird things that I was watching, or a lack of anything kind of releasing and relaxing to watch. They had these, you know, strange German craft where, you know, really odd things on the television. Yeah, I spent so much time at the Roundhouse inside that apartment in the set, which was, you know, I didn't have any scenes. John Lynch and Dylan did an outdoor scene in the water cab with Lemmy, and they had walking around the hallways and the stairs. I was just in the apartment. And so for me, it started to feel like my apartment, and it added to my ability to kind of get into the character's mindset, in that I literally just saw darkness all the time. I came in the morning, it was dark, I left, it was dark. It just, you know, it starts to get to you. But it was intense because anytime on a horror film, you know, as an actor, your body doesn't know you're acting. So if you go to work and you are yelling or screaming or freaked out 8, 12 hours a day, 5 days a week, 6 days a week, your body doesn't know that you are not. Your fight or flight mechanism goes off, and you're pretty tense. As somebody told me once while I was over there making it, they were like, take a bat and just beat the bed at night. You got to get it out of your body or whatever. But there was a part of me that didn't want to let it go until the movie was done. So, you know, I stayed in a sort of internally fairly keyed up, tight space while I was trying to, you know, get through that. The first AD, Ray Corbett, he had the most amazing, booming, deep British voice, and I had never done anything where any disrobing was going to happen. So at one point, I think the first day, I was sort of bent over, you know, with an ulcer on day 3. I just had met Dylan barely, and we're supposed to do this shower scene or whatever, and they cleared the set, and there was just this horrible booming voice of Ray, drop the robe, and it was like, oh, and it was just so horrifying. And made much worse by his like screaming it from the rafters with the Roundhouse echoing, like instead of like, okay, drop the robe now, it was just like, Stacey, drop the robe, like, ah. At one point, when I'm pulled out of the window and I'm hanging on the wire, they rigged me up. It took a long time, and the rig was, you know, the sort of suit was quite uncomfortable, and the riggers had had a huge party on the roof the night before for someone's birthday, and there was some shaky hands, and I just got a little spooked by it. So without telling anyone, I took the rig off. So I'm hanging, and before they rolled the platform away, I realized my hands were covered in the dried sticky blood, and I needed a baby wipe. And I asked the makeup artist, and she was like, we're out. And so she went to ask someone, and this was like second to last day of shooting, maybe the last day, I can't remember. And they were like, oh, just, you know, she's got the harness on, don't worry about it. But I was like, no, I took the harness off. I need a baby wipe. And they were like, we're out of money, you know, we don't have baby wipe. I'm like, go in my purse and get pounds and go get me baby wipes, because I'm gonna die if I fall, you know. And so then somebody must have said something, and some baby wipes appeared a few minutes later, cleaned my hands. But I was really friggin' scared when I was holding on, because I'd stupidly taken the harness off. I'm by no means a stunt person, but I did a lot of stuff in this because Richard really wanted you to see it was me. Most of the stunts I did, they saved to like the last 3 days. So I guess I thought, you know, if I got hurt, they got enough in the can, they could keep going. But, and I was very aware, like, wait a minute.
I don't know if Richard ever slept, you know what I mean? Because Richard was overseeing, you know, obviously directing the main unit, but then he would like take over and do the, you know, second unit at night. So I literally, I don't think he bathed the whole film.
He would sleep on the set. He never left the building. He would actually literally sleep on the set. I mean, I know that word literally is used a lot these days, and one doesn't want to use it too often because one uses it incorrectly. But in this case, he literally slept on set.
And I think, you know, Richard's strengths, among many, but creatively, are the fact that he doesn't, you know, he has a vision that he's pretty clear about. You know, he's an artist, and I think that's what, you know, that's what's enjoyable about a project like that. You know, he actually was responsive and, you know, and was willing to explore.
Richard obsesses on small things, and a lot of times people don't understand that. He'll just obsess on this close-up of this key, and we'll spend hours and hours shooting that, and production are like, well, why haven't you done the 5 pages of dialogue? And I can understand why it's important to Richard, but other people can't. That's what makes Richard sort of unique in his own sort of way, but he does obviously end up being in conflict with production because what he sees as important and what they see as important are two different things.
The thing about Richard, you knew he had the whole thing in his head. You knew he had a very specific vision from the people he hired to execute it, and they had just a really fantastic crew. But I laughed because when my first day, it was like a memo had gone out, everyone wearing black. You know, you looked around and it was like this kind of punky, gothic, music video looking group of people that were all in black, and Richard's always all in black with a hat and everything, and they were there to do his vision, and he did a really good job of explaining to them how, you know, how he saw it, and he's visually very talented, and you know, when he was happy, you knew it, and so you knew, okay, that's the direction, you know, he wants me to go. And then a lot of times he wouldn't tell you a lot if you were doing what he wanted, then you wouldn't hear from him a lot. He was just watching. But I remember once he gave me a really obscure reference, and I have a film history degree from USC, and I was like, I don't know what he's talking about. It was sort of a really obscure Russian movie, and there was a moment, and he was like, that's how you feel at this moment. And I was like, huh? And Steve Chivers just quietly said, look more afraid. And I was like, okay.
We find it very difficult now to nurture a talent like Richard Stanley, because he's left the field. He's not necessarily someone that you would put in a room with 3 actors and expect to make a drama. He relies very much on strong visual elements, and in Hardware was perfect for that, because he had to create a total vision for the film. I mean, it's his film. I mean, there are very few auteurs working in the film business, and Richard is definitely an auteur.
Of course, I'm terrified of the future. I always have been. And that's something that started when I was very young. I mean, somewhere around the time of those Walking Dude dreams, I was having a lot of nuclear war dreams as well. And I think just from being reasonably intelligent, and from being a 13-year-old or 14-year-old on up, I was reading enough science fiction back then to be able to see what was going to happen. The other thing, which is apart from the attrition of the environment, the way that we've hedged slowly further towards the hothouse sort of infernal atmosphere that Hardware exists in, is the gradual erosion of civil liberties. Because in Hardware they're really living in a right-wing version of the future. They play in the inner world where not only is Big Brother in charge, but everyone accepts it, and actually they probably voted for Big Brother. There's no sign of resistance in the Hardware world. Everyone's kind of subtly accepted those little trade-offs that have gone along with it. That's the most disturbing part, I guess, is the way that we've seen in England the proliferation of CCTV and complete surveillance and stuff, and the way that people have just accepted it, as they kind of have in Hardware, and people haven't rebelled or kind of gone against the stuff. So yeah, we're moving into a very strange world, and I'm frightened that if I stay alive another 20 years, I actually will be living in the Hardware universe.
But then I shot the dream sequence in Morocco when they went to shoot Carl at the beginning and the end. And after many days of many adventures in Morocco, I think they cut the dream sequence. So you never saw me in Morocco, but I was supposed to be there for a dream sequence where I wake up and I see Dylan's head in the sand, and it sort of foreshadows that I'm worried about him. And the crazy part was we landed from London in, I think it was Casablanca, and it was like 2 in the morning. Airport was really dead. We get off the plane, it was Steve and Joseph and Joanne and Richard and Carl and costume and I think one makeup artist, and Joseph Bennett's carrying this sort of bowling bag, and we're all standing there sort of bleary, and all of a sudden, you know, you're going through the conveyor or whatever, and they're like, open the bag, and he opens the bag and he pulls out this incredibly realistic head of Dylan, and all the Moroccan guards freak out and they pulled machine guns on us, and we're like, whoa, 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 whoa. But they think we're serial killers, and Joseph's carrying around a head. So that was like an amusing moment later, but at the time it was quite frightening.
You know, it's just a very small amount of us that went to Morocco, and we didn't, at that point we had like 0 money left on the movie. Like, everything was bartering. There wasn't anything, like I'd have to sit down and have like, you know, cups of mint tea with everybody to barter for like the equipment or locations.
when we would roll into somewhere, they would think, oh, a movie crew, you know, tons of money or whatever. And it's like, no, 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 we're a low budget. Like, I'm carrying a reflector in the desert, okay? This isn't, we're not going to be able to pay you off like enormous sums to shoot here or anything. So I felt it was very taxing on Joanne, that whole Moroccan adventure, you know, because they had these big movies prior, Sheltering Sky and you know, where they're flying in pasta for dinner and from Italy, and you know, we're sort of, where can we go with the local cuisine that we can afford to pay for everyone to eat dinner, you know? So it was on a much lower scale.
We got there and it was raining, and it was like in the middle of that we were in Azuga, which is near a food, which is way down near the sand dunes. Like these days there's hotels down there and everything, but at that time there was nothing there, absolutely nothing. It was just like a man with a couple of goats, and that was it. And we were down there for about a week, and it was raining, and all the local people were like, ooh, it hasn't rained in the desert in 55 years, and we were like, oh, typical.
The actual heroes of hardware for me, I should say, apart from Stacey Travis, who was just tremendous. Like, there would be no movie without Stacey. She completely holds that thing together. Were obviously Steve Chivers, the DP, who is just magnificent and did a tremendous job from day one. Joseph Bennett, the production designer, who based the whole film on the work of Albert Speer, the Nazi architect, and put a lot of subtleties into that set, which you know, just still amazes me. And of course, Simon Boswell, the composer. Simon had started out working obviously for Dario Argento, one of my heroes.
And Richard, I think, thought that I was Italian and phoned up Argento's production office, said could he get hold of me, not realising that I was living but half a mile from him in London. So the movie begins with this rather doomy and discordant theme, which goes like this. And what was interesting with hardware was, you know, I saw first of all the last thing that they shot, which was the stuff that was shot in Morocco, I think, which was all in the desert, and features Carl from the Fields of the Nephilim, you know, in his gas mask, kind of trekking across the desert. And I thought this desert stuff, you know, it's weird for a science fiction film, but it reminds me of Paris, Texas, you know. And a kind of light bulb went off in my head, you know, let's try and combine this sort of rather seedy atmospheric synthesizer stuff with a Ry Cooder style slide guitar. This guitar, by the way, is the actual one that I bought specifically to do hardware. And I've made a kind of habit of buying guitars when I'm asked to do a guitar score, which is not often, buying a nice guitar in order to have something fresh to inspire me. So this is the actual guitar that was used, though it was plugged in through an amp at the time. But this is the theme with slide guitar.
I mean, on the whole, hardware survived the editing process remarkably well. It was obviously longer, as these things are, and I think it was more of an underground movie. It was definitely more of a, slightly more of an art film, probably closer to, say, Combat Shock or Deadbeat at Dawn than to Terminator in the First Assembly. In that certainly the characters are a bit more abrasive and repulsive than they ended up being. Palace actually cut a few things right up front, which they found just too offensive. There was quite a lot of censorship that went on during the production process in terms of the scenes which would get ripped out of the script. A few things just didn't get shot. There were 2 more murders in the script, both of which got pruned out. This is the dwarf who got pulled through a metal shredder in the script, got set on fire and then pulled through a shredding machine, and the security guard who got impaled on one of the metal sculptures. Those big spiky metal sculptures are only in the movie so that Verne, the security guard, can be impaled on one and remain alive and kind of jiggle and scream and stuff, but they were never allowed to shoot that scene, so it just didn't happen. He just gets shot in the head straight up now in the movie and isn't tortured the way that he was originally. One of the things that galls me is the opening walk through town with Moe and Shades' dialogue, when it's more or less Shades' monologue, was originally a continuous take. Now it's about 3 different shots, because omitted from the middle of it is the fact they walk past a bunch of children beating up an old man, which Miramax didn't like, because they said if the lead guy in his first scene walks past an old man being beaten up by children without batting an eyelid, we won't sympathise with him. The other thing which always sticks in my head is that Jill's, while they're making love, Jill's sitting on top of Moe. In fact, she's watching television. She's so disinterested in what's going on, she's watching a Holocaust documentary on the television in the original cut, which was generally dropped out because everyone assumed that we were invoking the spectre of the Holocaust gratuitously, because I guess they hadn't really tapped into the amount of other little right-wing fascist things going on throughout the movie, the Albert Speer architecture, the fact that they're all complicit in basically working for the government and complicit in helping the system, and of course the whole idea of eugenics and population control, which is floating around all over the movie. So I felt that damaged the film a little for me, made it somewhat less serious.
Trust me.
No.
Trust me, Jill.
No.
Trust me. Just try.
No.
There you go.
Mo!
There was one scene between me and Dylan that we shot that I really felt was so necessary, and it was had a little more humor in it, and you saw the more playful side of our relationship, because a lot of the film, what's on there, it's kind of, at odds, and there was a scene where we were sort of playful and relaxed around each other and happy, and that didn't make it in the final cut, and I sort of, because I'd seen it in dailies and really felt like, to me, in the script, I built that arc into what I hoped was going to come across, so that later when you see how upset she is when he's gone, you've seen that they did really have a strong connection.
Of course, when it came to the United States, Hardware had its work cut out, because on its initial release it was granted an X rating. At that point in time, the NC-17 didn't exist. In that year, the X was handed down to a whole bunch of foreign movies. It was not just us, it was Peter Greenaway's Cook the Thief, His Wife and Her Lover, it was Pedro Almodovar's Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down, Wayne Wang's Life is Cheap, Toilet Paper is Expensive, all given X's, which meant that newspapers weren't allowed to carry advertising, and most cinemas wouldn't actually play them. It was no coincidence that they were pretty much all Miramax movies. Miramax had a habit then of buying up cheap foreign movies and marketing them with very sexually charged posters, which probably helped the X rating actually happen. And essentially that led to us having to not only campaign like crazy to try and change the rating system, which didn't happen fast enough. Eventually the NC-17 was introduced about a year later. But we did have to finally cut the movie to bring it in line with what they would actually agree to screen in the cinemas. So Hardware was quite severely shorn of some of its sharper edges when it came to the United States. I mean, came down to impact shots and close-ups of gore, largely. It meant that most of the murder scenes lost their highlights. The scene where the security guard is cut in half was pretty much largely eliminated. You see it only very, very briefly in the original American release. They had some kind of weird idea that you weren't allowed to torture people. I mean, these days, post-Hostel and everything else, this is hard to believe, but the idea was that you weren't allowed to keep people alive after they'd been maimed. 50% of Moe's death scene was just went missing. I mean, it wasn't even that gory. I guess it was just psychedelic, including the payoff on the Bible reading scene with the Mark 13 quote, which also was deleted for the initial theatrical release.
No flesh shall be spared for the elect, who then shall see him coming, the Son of Man, and he shall send his angels on a mission to gather together his flock.
When Hardware actually got released, we were all pretty surprised it got a theatrical to start off with. It had a huge theatrical. It opened in 700 screens in the United States. But to some extent, we were suckers because we'd made this very, very cheap movie. The average age on set was 16. I mean, the computer graphics were done on a school computer. There were an awful lot of people who were just way too young to be working, 14, 15 years old. People were paid very poorly. And of course, the whole thing was turned around for under $1 million. But once they actually had the movie, they marketed it as if it was a proper studio film and put it out into the multiplexes and pushed it like it was a multi-million-dollar proper action movie. So God knows it must have been in profit, presumably, before the thing opened. But it did very well. It didn't do that well critically, but very, very well financially, which then led to a scenario where for the next 20 years, everyone involved in the movie proceeded to fight each other over the profits, which means it's been very, very hard to see ever since.
The film was good. It was a good, strong project with a crazy, maverick director, and people thought it's worth investing time, energy, and even money into it. And that's how we did it. But it was mostly, I think, the quality we got, because I saw the film recently. It's pretty amazing to have made that film at that time for that amount of money.
As I said, it was one of those films that I think everybody did, and you came out of it and you put so much time and energy into it and worked so hard, but then you kind of feel like at the end of it, how did I do it? And you don't really know how you could ever do that again on that kind of money, but you sort of somehow managed to. It was just like run on adrenaline, I think, the whole production. And naivety. You know, I think we were all pretty green making it.
You have to put it in the time it was made as well. I mean, I think it's very important to realize there wasn't, you know, Aliens and Terminator were out there, but this was a guerrilla version. This was a low-budget version that was trying to just be a scary horror film and a sci-fi film, but it also had so many other layers to it and textures that gave it a real dark, edgy guerrilla feel, and there wasn't a lot out there like that at the time.
It's truly part of the alternative cinema that existed in the 80s that we set out to say, okay, may not be British as such, but it is shot in Britain and is a shot in the arm, because look, this is what cinema can be, and Hardware, I think, is a testament to the spirit of what Palace was and what the Scala Cinema was.
Of course, Hardware is kind of a victim of its own success in a way, which is pretty annoying. I mean, it made so much money on its initial release that, but like the goose that laid the golden egg, there was such a scrum of people trying to take it over or own it there afterwards that virtually nobody's seen the darn thing. They've managed to make it pretty much impossible to watch, at least for the last 20 years. But then they do say that once in every generation a plague shall fall upon you, and finally somehow the thing has reactivated and made its way back to a screen near you.